Good afternoon. Welcome to our pre-recorded session, which is an integral part of our live project management webinar. My name is Weronika Gasior, and I'm a Senior Finance and Operations Officer in Largas, and I will guide you through your contractual obligations as beneficiaries of Erasmus Mobility projects. Your grant agreement is a legally binding document between you, the beneficiary of the Erasmus program, and Largas, the national agency. The aim of your grant agreement is to ensure smooth management of your project. Your grant agreement clearly defines your roles and responsibilities, obligations of other beneficiaries, such as consortium members and the national agency. It clarifies what projects are to do and when, and confirms all changes recommended to your project during the evaluation and contracting process. Your grant agreement is split into several sections and annexes, including the main body, which is called Special Conditions, Annex 1, which is General Conditions, Addendum to the Grant Agreement on Virtual Activities, Annex 2, which provides description of the project and estimated budget of the project, Annex 3, which gives financial and contractual rules, Annex 4, applicable rates, Annex 5, mandates, which is applicable only for consortium projects, and Annex 6, templates for grant agreements between participants and the beneficiary. There are several articles in special conditions that we wish to highlight to you, and these are Article 1.2, which states duration of your project and also its start and end dates. All your project activities, including preparation, actual travel, actual mobility and debriefing sessions, etc., must take place between the specified start and end date, otherwise they will be deemed ineligible. Article 1.3 specifies the amount of your awarded grant, which might be slightly different from the amount you originally applied for. During the evaluation phase, the national agency assesses your grant request and might introduce some reductions when it feels that some requested costs are either ineligible or incorrectly applied. Please note that the awarded grant for your project cannot be increased in any circumstances. Special conditions very clearly define your project's payment and reporting arrangements, both in Article 1.4. Grant agreements are issued to beneficiaries in 2 copies. Once they are signed by the legal representative of your organization, they are returned to Largas to be co-signed by our Executive Director. Once our Executive Director co-signs 2 copies of the grant agreement, a first pre-financing payment is raised and made to a project's bank account, as specified in Article 1.5. In majority of cases, the first pre-financing payment represents 70% of the total awarded grant. Up to 30% is then paid to the project upon the receipt and successful evaluation of its final report. The national agency has a certain number of days to make relevant payments. It is 30 days from the signature of the contract for the first payment and 60 days from the receipt of the final report for the final payment. Some projects might have a different payment schedule. Organizations that have weaker financial capacity, poor liquidity, poor track record in terms of repayment of refunds or late reporting, etc., may be subject to a different payment structure at the discretion of Largas. All Key Action 1 projects include the submission of participant reports and a final beneficiary report after the project has ended. You may also need to submit interim reports depending on the payment structure for your project. This is all taken into account in Article 1.4. You will have 60 days from the end date of your project to submit your final report via Mobility Plus tool, which is an online monitoring and reporting tool. By submitting the final report, you are requesting a final payment to be made to your project. The final report is evaluated against quality criteria in line with the approved project and scored up to 100 points. If a final report is recognized as of poor quality, partial or late implementation, a reduction to its organizational support may happen if the project scores below 50 points. It is vital then that you do provide as much as possible information on the implementation of your projects to showcase its quality, benefits and achievements. Interim report is submitted during the project and is closely linked to project stage payment structure. Interim report is a nice way to monitor your project's quality implementation, but also your financial expenditure over a defined period of time, which is clearly stated in Article 1.4.3. By submitting an interim report, beneficiaries request that further pre-financing payment is made to their bank account during the project. Such pre-financing payment is indeed made once the report passes the evaluation, and also when it shows that beneficiaries spent at least 70% of their first pre-financing payments made to their projects upon the signature of their grant agreements. Beneficiaries are allowed to submit an interim report either by deadline or when the 70% rule is fulfilled, which means that an interim report can be also submitted before the deadline specified in the grant agreement. In a situation when the interim report is due, but beneficiary's expenditure is still below 70% threshold, the interim report still needs to be submitted for evaluation purposes, and a further one will be then requested once the 70% threshold is met. Currently, an interim report is a Word document evaluated using traffic lights model with relevant feedback and recommendations provided by the national agency to beneficiaries. Article 1.5 provides details of your project's bank account. You will find it on the signature page of your grant agreement. It is essential to let us know if your project's bank details change. Such change requires a formal amendment to the grant agreement, and it is vital, both for you and us, that we make payments to correct and valid bank accounts. It is very important that you also understand your and our responsibilities regarding processing of personal data. For the reasons, please read carefully Article 1.6 of Special Conditions and Articles 2.3 and 2.7 of General Conditions. These articles will give you an overview of a data controller, definitions of communication details, means, and their format for both you as the beneficiaries and us as the national agency. They will also highlight your right to access, rectify, erase your own personal data, as well as your rights to restrict data portability or to object to data processing. Since your successful project is a mobility project, you are required to implement effective procedures and arrangements that will ensure safety and protection of your project's participants, including health and safety requirements, carrying out risk assessment on travel, receiving organizations, accommodations, or implementing safeguarding measures where necessary. You are also obliged to ensure that both insurance coverage and financial support is provided to participants to allow them to take part in the project. When managing Erasmus Plus Mobility project, you will become familiar with a mobility tool, which is a monitoring and reporting online tool created to support beneficiaries in encoding their activities, participants, and reporting project's expenditure. You are contractually obliged to update the tool on a regular monthly basis. This will help you to maintain a clear overview of your project's progress. While the use of mobility tool is compulsory, the use of Erasmus Plus results platform is not. However, it is a good way of showcasing your project and its results, including any tangible deliverables that you might have produced as part of your project. Whether you are directly responsible for the management of your project or promoting the funding opportunities available, you are required to use the European Commission's Erasmus Plus emblem and associated wording for any project outputs and promotional materials produced, and to publicly acknowledge the support received from the European Union, which includes events, conferences, and seminars. When acknowledging the support received, there are a range of ways to display the emblem, wording and disclaimer, and relevant guidelines are provided through the link included in the Article 1.11. I would strongly recommend that you visit this webpage, as it does provide a very comprehensive guidelines on how to acknowledge the EU support. Annex 1 to the grant agreement, General Conditions, starts with 3 important articles, which provide definitions of various terms used in the grant agreement, describe your roles and responsibilities as both the beneficiary and coordinating partner, and describe roles and responsibilities of consortium members, which is in case of multi-beneficiary agreements. They also define how the official communication between different parties involved in the project should look like. As is the nature of projects such as these, several changes may take place throughout the project life cycle. If anything unexpected occurs, please communicate it clearly to Lorgas to see what can be done. It will often be the case that these changes can be accounted for through amendments to your contract, which could include changes as large as project activities or as small as bank account details. Amendment requests need to be made in writing directly to the NA, have to be justified, sought before the relevant activity takes place, and at least 1 month before the end date of the project. Where necessary, they should be accompanied by supporting documentation. The amendment process is clearly outlined in this slide. It does involve completion of an amendment request form by the beneficiary, its assessment, and then further approval or decline by the national agency. If a proposed change requires a formal amendment to the grant agreement, 2 copies of amended articles will be issued to your legal representative, and once signed, they will be returned to us, co-signed by our executive director, and 1 copy will be returned to you, while the other one will be kept on file in Largus. Our amendment process is slightly different for those projects that seek extension to their duration due to COVID-19. If you wish to avail of an extension to your project because you could not realize your planned physical activities within your project's original timeframes, you will also need to complete and submit an amendment request form, signed by the legal representative of your organization. If approved, a 1-signature letter will be posted to you to confirm our approval of your extension request. This process is available at the link provided on this slide at our website. In cases where mobilities could not go ahead due to unforeseeable circumstances beyond the participant's control and not due to his or her negligence or error, and if you did incur expenditure which you cannot now recover, you may wish to apply for force majeure. Application for force majeure has to be submitted in writing using a force majeure form. The request needs to be duly justified and accompanied by supporting documentation if and where needed. Given these very unprecedented circumstances we are still finding ourselves in, we do strongly advise that before booking travel and accommodation, or any other project activities for that matter, you do check the relevant government guidance and support channels as part of your project's risk management. In Articles 2.16 and 2.17 of General Conditions, it is clearly specified in what circumstances suspension or early termination of the project might happen. Both suspension or early termination of the project and the grant agreement might happen at any point at the request of both the beneficiary and the national agency. In both instances, a formal notification will be required. What really is essential to understand here is the importance of communication between the project and the national agency. We would like you to keep communication channels open and to let us know about any issues or problems you may come across and experience during your project. Part B of the General Conditions also includes several important articles which I highlighted on this slide. Some of them have been already covered or will be covered during the project management webinar. Therefore, for the purposes of this session, I would like to only highlight the importance of the following ones. Article 2.23 emphasizes the need for timely submission of your reports. Failure to submit reports or submit them on time may result in your project being suspended or terminated and a recovery of your grant. If you anticipate any delays with submission of any of your reports, please do communicate this to us in advance. Article 2.27 lists all potential checks your project may be subject to from either national agency or relevant external bodies such as Commission themselves or the European Court of Auditors, for example. Those checks are always communicated in advance. Please note that all your project's documentation need to be kept for 5 years after Largus makes the final payment to your project, unless your awarded grant was lower than 60,000, in which case the period for keeping project's documentation is limited to 3 years after the date of the final payment. For all projects funded in 2020, the grant agreement will include an addendum. This addendum is a direct result of the impact COVID-19 had and still has on mobility projects. The Commission, recognizing significant barriers in delivery of project activities during the pandemic, proposed some flexible measures, including the possibility of delaying planned physical activities or extending the project, or, as a third option, carrying out planned physical activities via virtual means. This addendum is a response to this third option and outlines financial and contractual implications of organizing virtual activities instead of physical ones. You have either already received or will receive your grant agreement shortly, together with the addendum. Both the grant agreement and the addendum are to be signed by the project's legal representative in 2 copies and sent back to Lorgas for the signature of our executive director. Once co-signed, 1 copy of the grant agreement together with 1 copy of the addendum will be sent back to you and 1 will be kept on file in Lorgas. We do recommend that you do carry out a risk assessment of your project activities and their original timeframes in order to decide which option proposed by the Commission you wish to avail of. If you decide to organize a virtual mobility, you will need to complete a virtual activity request form, which will be further reviewed, approved, or declined by the national agency. Please note that virtual activities should only take place following NA's approval. Annex 2 to the grant agreement includes description of the project by referencing your original application, and it also provides a breakdown of your awarded grant, details of the beneficiary, and, in case of consortium projects, also details of consortium members. Annex 3, which is called Financial and Contractual Rules, is a very important document which defines conditions for eligibility of costs, rules regarding the use of both unit cost and real cost. It also outlines when they are eligible and what evidence you need to keep for each awarded cost. Annex 3 will provide you also with very clear guidance on when your grant agreement may be reduced and outline different types of check that can be performed in respect to your project by Lorgas. Full scope of Annex 3 is covered during live project management webinar. Annex 4 lists applicable rates for travel, individual support, organizational support, linguistic support, and course fees. These are the same rates which are embedded in the application form and which you would have used when completing the form. Annex 5 includes mandates. This annex is only applicable to consortium projects. Mandates are in fact letters of intent confirming the willingness of the beneficiary and each consortium member to participate in the project. Each mandate is signed by both your legal representative and also the legal representative of your relevant consortium member. In majority of cases, mandates included in this annex are the same as those submitted with the application form, unless some details changed during period between the submission of the application and contracting process. In Annex 6, you will find templates for agreements between beneficiary and participants. There are separate templates for learners and separate ones for staff in VET mobility projects. In both cases, their use is compulsory. There are 3 different templates to be used between the beneficiary and staff participating in VET mobility projects, and these are Erasmus plus VET Staff Mobility Agreement, which is individual for each staff and includes their details as well as the details of the proposed program abroad. The second compulsory template is the grant agreement for teaching and training, which again is individual for each staff and includes their details, details of the planned mobility, as well as financial payment arrangements agreed between staff participants and the beneficiary, as well as obligations of both parties. The third compulsory template is an Erasmus Plus quality commitment, which lists obligations of the sending and receiving organizations, as well as staff participants. There are 5 templates for learners' mobility, and their use will depend on whether you are planning on using ECVET in your project. If you're not using ECVET, then you will need 3 templates. The first one is Erasmus Plus VET Learning Agreement, which would cover details of the learner as well as the details of the planned program abroad. The second template will be Grant Agreement for VET Traineeships, which would outline the relationship between the learner and the beneficiary, including their details, financial payment arrangements agreed by the 2 parties, and including their obligations resulting from their participation in the project. The last template would be Erasmus Plus Quality Commitment, which would list obligations of the sending and receiving organization as well as the learner. If your project is planning on using ECVET, you would use the same grant agreement for traineeship and Erasmus Plus VET Quality Commitment templates, however, a different learning agreement. You will use ECVET Learning Agreement. In addition to those 3 templates, you will be required to use an ECVET Memorandum of Understanding, which aim is to outline a framework of cooperation between involved organizations, both sending and the receiving one.
I would like to thank you for your attention and wish you all good luck with your projects. We are here to support you, so please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions related to Erasmus Plus program or your projects. We are really looking forward to working with you. Thank you so much.